Dr. Elizabeth McInvale, and I'm the director here at the McLean OCD Institute in Houston, Texas. We're a specialized intensive treatment center that specializes in anxiety disorders and obsessive-compulsive disorder. OCD, it's something that you've probably heard a lot about. Maybe it's a term you've heard used frequently, but I would question if it's a term that you've heard used correctly. Oftentimes, OCD is stigmatized and it's misdiagnosed for many reasons. One of the top, in my opinion, being that society thinks of OCD in ways that really further increase the stigma that surrounds the diagnosis. Many times when we think of OCD, we think of somebody who's a neat freak or somebody who likes their items arranged a certain way, but OCD is so much more. It's one of the top 10 reasons people file for disability in the United States. It is one of the most prevalent mental health conditions globally. It impacts about 2 to 3% of individuals across the world. It doesn't discriminate, so OCD affects all of us across the board. But what we see is that access to effective evidence-based treatment does discriminate. It's often hard to find treatment. It tends to be very costly. And there's many years that exist from the time a person starts to experience symptoms until they receive a proper diagnosis. OCD is obsessive-compulsive disorder. The obsessions are unwanted intrusive thoughts that cause the individual distress. These are thoughts that we don't like, we don't enjoy, and that we get no pleasure out of. In fact, the thoughts are also accompanied by anxiety and distress. And so in turn, the individual tries to figure out what they can do to feel better. How can they get rid of these thoughts? How can they get rid of the anxiety and distress that accompanies these thoughts? And that's where the compulsions come in. The compulsions are repetitive behaviors that are done in an effort to alleviate that anxiety and the distress that the thoughts have caused. So we often see OCD in so many forms. One of the common forms you've maybe heard about is contamination. This is often where individuals have unwanted intrusive thoughts that they have become contaminated, or that an item or object is contaminated. And the repetitive behaviors or compulsions are activities like hand washing and, cleaning excessively, washing their clothes, whatever it might be. The second piece that's really important when we think about OCD and how it presents is the role that avoidance can play. Somebody with really severe OCD could actually engage in minimal rituals in a day, but maybe they're avoiding the world, right? Maybe they are not engaging in activities that they used to engage in. They're no longer seeing family members or friends because of their OCD and the distress it would cause them if they interact with those folks. The good news is that despite the prevalence and despite the disabling nature of the illness, there is amazing effective treatment. OCD is most effectively treated with a combination of both medication and behavioral therapy. The specific behavioral therapy that we do is called exposure with response prevention, also known as ERP. It's a specific form of cognitive behavioral therapy, and the concept is kind of exactly what it sounds like. We slowly and systematically expose individuals to the things that are triggering, distressing for them, right? Those things that really are accompanied by or cause either the intrusive thoughts, but we kind of make those intrusive thoughts come on. And we engage in response prevention, so we prevent them from doing that ritual. Now, when we're talking about trauma and all sorts of different diagnoses, trauma, social anxiety, you name it, exposure therapy is very common, and maybe you've heard of that as a type of treatment that people often do for CBT. It's important that we know for OCD it's not exposure therapy alone, it's exposure with response prevention. So I'll explain that briefly, but imagine if my doorknob is contaminated. Well, to get out of my office, I have to touch the doorknob, so I have to do an exposure. So that's great, right? I do an exposure, I touch the doorknob, I go to leave my office. However, if I walk straight across my hall to the bathroom and wash my hands, I did the exposure, but I've actually done a behavior now that has reinforced my illness, right? It has told my OCD that I should be scared, that the doorknob is dangerous, and that I need to do something to get rid of that feeling. Exposure with response prevention is that we do the exposure, we touch the doorknob, and we prevent the response that we normally would do, so we don't engage in that hand wash. What that means is that we sit with the distress, we sit with the discomfort, we sit with the feeling that I'm contaminated, something might happen, that this doesn't feel right. But eventually we will what we call habituate, right? Eventually, if we don't do that behavior, our anxiety will subside, and we will teach ourselves, we'll teach our brain and we'll teach our OCD that we don't have to engage in behaviors to feel better. and that we can actually live our life without doing rituals and still eventually feel the same relief or the same average feelings that someone without OCD feels when we have these intrusive thoughts. At the core of OCD, it's all about uncertainty, right? We're trying and searching for certainty. Can we feel 100% certain? Can we know that things are okay? Can we be sure we're not sick or we're not going to get somebody sick? And the reality is that the entire point of treatment is learning to live with that, learning to live with uncertainty, which most individuals do every day of our life. We just sometimes don't even recognize that's what we're doing. Treatment is extremely successful. Individuals with OCD can learn to manage their symptoms. They can live a successful and amazing life despite their diagnosis. And that's what's important for us to know. The message is a message of hope. It's a message that you can have severe OCD, you can have a severe level of functioning, yet you can live an amazing life. And what we mean by that is that you don't have to have that severe level of functioning forever, right? But you can have or be experiencing a severe level of functioning, and with the appropriate treatment, you can learn to manage your symptoms so that you can have that amazing, successful life that you deserve. You know, we know that if OCD goes untreated, it will cause continued disability and continued distress. We know that it impacts every facet of someone's quality of life, which also means that it can increase the rates of depression and potentially the rates of suicide. Our goal is that we can start to engage in preventative medicine for mental health the way we encourage preventative medicine across the board for other medical conditions, right? We don't want somebody to get to the point where they're feeling hopeless or where they're thinking about suicide. Our goal is that we can help get people the care and access to the care that they need and deserve well before that. The flip side is that if you're already there, if you're feeling unsafe, if you're feeling suicidal, there is help for you. We can stabilize you, right? You hopefully have learned through this series how to get appropriate stabilization if you're feeling unsafe or suicidal, but it's call 911, call the National Suicide Prevention Line, or go to your local emergency room. And we want to get you stabilized. And once we are no longer in an acute state, right, we're not distressed, our safety is not at risk, we can engage in the appropriate treatment for our OCD, for our anxiety, or for whatever mental health condition you're going through. Treatment exists, and help and hope are always available.
Hello, my name is Wykeisha McKinney. I am the Zero Suicide Program Manager for the Harris Center for Mental Health and IDD in Houston, Texas. The Harris Center provides mental health services to people in the Harris County area that are low income or no income, underinsured or uninsured. We provide outpatient services like counseling, group services, crisis care. We have a crisis line as well, and in addition to some other support services for those who may be experiencing a mental health crisis. I think what is the beauty of the Harris Center is that we do reach those individuals who may not traditionally reach out for mental health care, and therefore may not feel like healthcare is accessible to them or feel like mental health care is unaffordable for them. We bridge that gap and provide those services and care for individuals who may be dealing with stress, depression, major mental health problems, and don't have usual access to care. With Houston being a very large city and the Harris County area being a very large city, we have 4 clinics in the area in the northwest, northeast, southwest, and southeast parts of Houston. And so very accessible to everyone in the city. And in addition, we have other programs and services like at the Neuropsychiatric Center in downtown and the Medical Center, and even some respite care facilities as well throughout the city. Our programs and services are easily found through our website, www.theharriscenter.org. You can call our crisis line as well, 713-970-7000, and they can even tell you information about our programs and services, or if you're having a crisis in general, they would be able to provide some services and care. So the Harris Center for Mental Health and IDD has 4 locations across the Harris County area, as well as providing services, and we also provide services to adults and children, and we have our youth and child mental health services in 50 co-location areas across the city. So we try our best to be as accessible as we possibly can and meet the needs of our community.
My name is Jennifer Battle. I am the Director of Access at the Harris Center for Mental Health and IDD. IDD means Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. We are located in Harris County, Texas, which is the 4th largest county in the United States. The largest city in our county is Houston, so if that helps give you some context where we are. So we serve almost 4 million people a year in our population. So we've got a lot of folks that we can work with and who are eligible to receive services in our care. In addition to all of our clinic-based services or outpatient-related services, we also operate a 24-hour crisis line. We are part of a network of crisis lines across the United States. So the work that we do here in Harris County on our crisis line is very similar to the work that crisis lines will do in many other places in the United States. In fact, we're affiliated with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is a network of almost 200 crisis lines across the United States. So if somebody calls that number, the 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-8255, which is the number to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and if they call from Harris County, then that call is going to be answered in my crisis line. It'll be the same for other counties all across the United States, and those calls will be sent to the counties that are closest to the person that's calling, which is a great thing to happen. So that you'll know that when you call, hopefully your call is being connected to a community worker, a person who knows a little bit about what resources and services might be available near you. But calling a crisis line can feel really scary, especially if it's not something that you've ever done before. So I kind of just wanted to tell you a little bit about what we do at our crisis line, which is pretty similar to what crisis lines do across the country. So the first thing is that most crisis lines are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We know that you can't plan a convenient time to have your crisis. And so we want to make sure that there's somebody that's here and available to talk to you when you need to talk. So that's the first thing. When you call, we'll be here to pick up. The second thing to know is that anybody working at any crisis line typically does that work because they're very empathetic, kind, and caring people. But we also add specific training for folks whenever they come work in a crisis line around how to make sure that the other person on the other end of the line feels cared for and understands that we actually want to hear their story in a non-judgmental way. So what you should hear when you call a crisis line is a lot of empathy, a lot of support, a lot of care, but you shouldn't hear advice or judgment. So once we talk with somebody, we will ask you some questions. We will ask you at some point in our conversation if you're having any thoughts of suicide, which is a really hard question and can feel very scary whenever someone asks you that question. But it's really important for us to talk about because we need to know what type of care you might be interested in. If you're not having any suicidal thoughts, that's fine. We're still happy to talk with you because crisis can look all different kinds of ways. Having a suicidal crisis is only one type of crisis, but we're prepared and ready to handle that if that is the type of support that you need. So we will ask you that question. And we ask that you answer us honestly, which we also know is scary for people because there are some people who've called crisis lines in the past who feel like they've told the person that they are feeling suicidal, and then they feel like the next thing that happens is somebody calls police or calls an ambulance. And that has happened, and I'm sorry if that happened to you and that was not what you were looking for. At my center, we make a conscientious effort to not include any sort of 911 or law enforcement or EMS without really collaboratively coming to that decision with the person that's calling us. And we also know that that's very rare that we would need to do that anyway, because for the most part, when we talk to somebody on the crisis line, we're just providing you a space to vent, to talk about your concerns. Again, we're gonna be empathetic, warm, and caring. We may talk to you about what resources that you have available. Do you have any friends or family that you trust? We might ask ask you questions to see if you have access to any sort of insurance, because then we're asking these questions to help give us an idea about if you want something else, like if you want counseling or if you want to see a therapist, then we can make some decisions about what the best next resource might be for you. But you don't even have to take a resource. Most of the people that call us on the crisis line, they just feel better after talking with somebody for a few minutes just to get some of the heavy stuff off of their chest. Oftentimes putting into words some of the feelings and thoughts that you've been having that you may not have felt comfortable yet or had the words to put together to tell your friends or family. A lot of people tell us that just having the opportunity to talk through it with one of our crisis line counselors gives them the courage and the words and the language that they need to talk to their friends and family. And so oftentimes we'll end the call creating what we might call a safety plan with a person where it says, okay, now that we've talked, what do you want to do next? You mentioned that maybe you want to talk to your mom or your sister or your friend. Do you feel like you're going to be able to do that? When do you think you would be able to do that? Do you want to do that today? Do you want to do that tomorrow? Etc. And so we'll come up with a plan, and then we'll end the call always with an invitation for you to call back if you ever feel like you need additional support or care. Sometimes people are nervous about calling a crisis line because they want to remain anonymous. Remaining anonymous means that you don't tell us your name or any other sort of details about yourself. That is totally okay. You can call us and choose not to tell us your name. That doesn't mean we won't ask you for it, though, because we do want to ask your name because we like to have that conversation and build that rapport so that we can feel a connection. But sometimes people will tell us a name that's not their real name, but a name that they would just like to go by during the call, and that is absolutely okay. There is a difference between being anonymous and then having something be confidential. So you do, in some cases, if somebody would tell us their full name and even tell us their address or what have you, that we would keep that information, but that we don't give that information out publicly to anyone. So any information that we receive from a caller goes into a protected site that we work with only within our program. So no one else has access to that information. With that being said, there's a couple of really important caveats. The times when confidentiality is allowed to be breached is if you are in an active suicidal crisis, meaning that based on what you've told me, I'm really worried that if you don't get help within maybe even the next hour, that you could be at risk of dying from suicide. That you are a minor, and meaning that you're a person that's under the age of 18 and that you've experienced some sort of abuse at the hands of an older person, right? Physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, and that you need help right away. Or that you are a person who is an adult who has a disability, or you're an elderly person who has been abused. So under those circumstances, we do have the responsibility as care providers to assist you. And we can breach that confidentiality in those very limited cases in order to alert protective services of some sort if we feel like you need that immediate care. In my crisis center, if one of our crisis line counselors feels that one of those situations has happened, they are required to talk to a supervisor before they make any immediate decisions about alerting another person to the situation in the call. So there's definitely layers of protection that are built into our service so that we can make sure that we're only breaching that confidentiality when it is absolutely necessary for your safety and care.
My name is Angela Williams, President and CEO of Easter Seals. With over 30 years of experience in nonprofit and corporate arenas and having served on active duty in the United States Air Force, I further Easter Seals' mission to change the way the world defines and views disability and to ensure our military veterans receive the supports they need when returning home. Easter Seals has been an invaluable resource for people with disabilities, veterans, and seniors, as well as their families, caregivers, and communities for more than 100 years. Our national network of affiliates delivers outcome-based services throughout the lifespan to more than 1.5 million people nationwide every year. Plus, we're a powerful advocate at the federal, state, and local levels for the 1 in 4 Americans living with disability. We've served transitioning military, veterans, and their families and caregivers since World War II and continue to be the go-to partner on whom they can rely to ensure their successful transition into civil life. Our goal is to make sure people of all abilities live, learn, work, play, and act in their communities. We provide hands-on, comprehensive, vital programs and support to help people reach their full potential, including adult and senior services, autism services, medical rehabilitation, mental health services, and residential and housing services. We have programs designed to help children and adults learn and often relearn basic functions to help master skills needed to develop and thrive and be sharp and active across the lifespan. This includes an online development screening tool called Make the First 5 Count, assistive technology services, children's services, early intervention, child care, placement, and related services helping people prepare for the workforce. We make sure that everyone can play, have fun, and participate in their communities with healthy programs for children, adults, and caregivers to relax and connect with friends and engage in constructive activities like camp and recreation. We offer respite and support services as well. And we encourage everyone to act through community engagement and outreach, as well as educational programming. We engage in policy that supports our mission. In particular, we started the Black Child Fund to help end racial disparity in healthcare, childcare, and education faced by Black children early and throughout the lifespan. We've also been focusing a lot on mental health, especially during this pandemic, as we grapple with frightening statistics that reflect the challenges we're all facing as a result of the crisis due to the hardships many have experienced in the past year. At Easter Seals, we believe that when people receive the help they need and when they can live in the communities they want, their possibilities are limitless.
No, you can't understand what's going on with me. No, it doesn't make sense, but it's just